Howdy, howdy. I'm out here for my walk this evening. Lovely walking surfaces. Gotta be careful where you park tonight. You might have to get towed. Just get out of one of these holes. So I did some research here, and I found, for example, the Aftertreatment wire harness might cost as low as $600. And I was thinking about this. I'm like, well, you know, is this a separate issue? Is a wire harness the root cause? And I thought about that, and I thought about that, and you know what I think? I think these two things are related, because if the DEF doser valve was leaking DEF, collecting into that boot from the wire connector, it was dripping down the wire harness, down through the flex tubing, for example. Now, it's possible that the DEF is corrosive, for example. It's made from urea, which is kind of like a nitrate. One of the guys in the lobby was describing it to me. He was a farmer, and there's different grades of nitrate, and he said it's very caustic. So now you can start seeing where these two things are probably related. You probably had a DEF doser valve leaking, which is a common thing. It was dripping down onto the wire, and because it's has a little bit of caustic nature to it, could have been eating away at the rubber insulation of the wire, and then you're getting shorts in the wire because of the DEF fluid leaking. So now the wire harness needs to be replaced, and you're getting intermittent codes that come on and then go off and then come back on, because that wire is making contact intermittently. You know, so one bounce it makes contact, next bounce it doesn't have contact. So one bounce you get the check engine light, next bounce check engine light goes away. That's a typical wire harness issue, and these things could very much be related. You know, it's one of these things where they test the DEF doser valve and they say there's nothing wrong with it, according to them. You're like, okay, but it obviously is leaking because there was an accumulation that I poured out on the ground. Now, it's since dried since before I came to Freightliner. In hindsight, if I had not touched it when they inspected it, they could have found how much leakage there was and possibly be under warranty. But because I was being proactive, in hindsight, you know, you're trying to find out as much about the repair as you can. So, you know, if I had taken my hands-off approach, they might have found it on their own and had it covered under warranty. But even if they replaced the DEF doser valve under warranty, the problem still wasn't going away. So I think there was two components here that were probably affected. You had the DEF doser unit itself, which was leaking, and then the DEF coming in contact on the wires and corroding the wires. So I think that's the likely scenario of what happened. So it was like a ticking time bomb. You know, these things could occur anywhere, anytime. You know, and you could be at 0-degree temperature outside, or you could be at 100-degree temperature outside when these things happen. And you probably would have to get towed to Freightliner. That would cost you at least $1,000, maybe more. You know, so the fact that I didn't get towed, I was only 6 miles away from Freightliner. I was able to drive, not get towed, so that saved like $1,000 at least. So then they got me in relatively quickly. If I was in a big city like Dallas, there'd be a week wait time at least, plus, you know, 3 days to work on it, so maybe a week and a half. these guys are going to get it done within three business days. So, you know, I could complain about the cost, but there's also some savings here too, because if it had happened somewhere else, it would have been more expensive. You know, whether it's under warranty or not, tow bill alone could have been much higher, you know, than the actual repair cost that I'll pay this time. So, you know, I was thinking about it. I'm like, oh, you know, I wish I would have just got the harness done and not done the doser valve. But you know, as I thought about it, I'm like, well, you know, I did notice that the wires were soaked. They were soaking wet, and it was dripping onto the ground. You know, so I don't think these two things are unrelated. I think they're very much related. I think the valve was leaking. I think the nitrate part of the DEF corroded the wires, and both things needed to be replaced. I think both the valve needed to be replaced and the wires need to be replaced. So the first thing we did was we changed the valve, and then I drove 5 miles, fault code's come back. So we know it's not the valve, it's a brand new valve. So the other component here in this mystery of troubleshooting was the wires, because they tested the after-treatment control module and that was working fine. So there's only so many components to this system, you know. So I mean, there's a logical troubleshooting process to this based on the fault codes, and we know it was DEF system related based on the fault code. So we know that the valve was leaking because of so much accumulation that occurred in that rubber boot, and we know that the leak was exposed to the wires. So I think these two things were related. I think there's a direct correlation between the leak of the DEF doser valve and why the wire harness now needs to be replaced. So, and it's probably not going to be under warranty. You know, it's unfortunate. They test the DEF doser valve, but the test doesn't tell you whether or not it's leaking. What it tells you is it working? You know, is it producing the appropriate amount of DEF for the performance of the system? So, and the answer to that was yes. So it's not under warranty. But if it's leaking, even if it's leaking just a little bit, which it probably is, it's only leaking a little bit, and over time it accumulates into that rubber boot, which is kind of like a rubber sleeve that slides over the connection. So you got a pool of DEF fluid collecting into that rubber boot, and it's dripping down into the wire harness and accumulating in the flex tubing of the wire harness. And then because it's caustic, corrosive, it eats away at the rubber insulation of the wire, and now the wires are making direct contact with one another, and as you drive down the road, it's throwing fault codes. So I think that's how you put two and two together and say, okay, it's not one or the other, it's both. It's both the DEF doser valve and the wire harness. You know, it's like, because initially you're like, well, how are these two things related? You know, it's either one or the other, you know. It's like, well, why is the wire harness bad? Well, because the DEF was leaking onto the wire harness. That's why the wire harness is bad. So it's unfortunate. I don't think it's going to be covered under warranty. But on the other hand, I think the wire harness repair should be, it should be less than $2,000. It really should be, but we'll have to wait and see how much labor time's involved. But If this had happened in no man's land, you're looking at a tow bill of about the same amount, just to get towed. You get towed 300 miles, that's going to cost you, $3,000 or more. And then if you get into a big city, Salt Lake City, Phoenix, Dallas, you're going to sit there and wait a week before they even look at your truck. So you're going to have a cost associated with lost opportunity, the money you could have made that you didn't make because you were waiting to get your truck in the shop. So they got me in right away, and I didn't have to get towed, and I'll probably get back on the road tomorrow afternoon, which is Wednesday, which is good. It's not bad. If it can get out of here with $2,000, $3,000 repair, I think that'd be perfectly fine. I fully expect to have replaced this wire harness sometime during the course of owning this truck. It was just a matter of when. It's like these wire harnesses don't last long. They don't last, up to 700,000 miles. Eventually, you're gonna need to replace it. And it's just one of those things. Sooner or later, you're going to have to replace that wire harness, and it's probably not going to be under warranty. It's a normal wear and tear routine item on the truck. They'll have to be replaced sometime along the way. Just like your brakes need to be replaced, your shocks need to be replaced. Those things aren't under warranty either. So wire harnesses typically not under warranty. Not unless the truck is brand new, but they'll look at the mileage of the truck and they'll say, normal wear and tear, 400,000 miles. It's to be expected, So it's one of these things where, like I did in my other video, I said count your blessings, because I broke down 6 miles from Freightliner. And they got me in right away. I didn't have to be towed. I had the job done within 3 business days. That right there has value. You may not think it does, but if you broke down somewhere else, you're looking at a tow bill, plus waiting a week, plus the cost of the repair. So, I'm not happy about it, but I know it could be a whole lot worse than what it is. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.